So another important thing to point out is that not all liquids actually follow Newton's law. So I stated Newton's law as a fact, and it is mostly true for engineering fluids. So especially things like water and many oils, most oils under normal conditions behave like Newtonian fluids. But there are a lot of fluids that don't behave that way. So there are a class of fluids called shear thinning fluids, for example, in which the relationship between shear stress and shear strain is not linear, but in fact the viscosity reduces the more the more quickly you try and strain it. So that's actually a kind of useful property in manufacturing, if you think about it. So imagine that I'm trying to dispense a fluid through like a very tiny opening. So in that case, I might have velocity that changes very rapidly from, say, the center of your opening to the wall. Because remember that I said that there's this thing called the no-slip condition. So if I have a wall of, say, a stationary nozzle, its velocity is 0, and the center line of that nozzle is the highest velocity. So inside a very small pipe, you might have a very high strain rate, but as soon as you leave the nozzle, the no-slip condition doesn't exist, and actually the strain rates tend to go way, way down. So under those conditions, you can think of a shear thinning liquid as one that sort of hardens. It becomes, harder to flow when it's at low strain rate. So that sort of behavior tends to happen in liquids that are filled with some kind of filler. So like imagine you're putting short fibers for a composite material, for example, into a liquid. Those sort of materials tend to shear thin, is the word for it. So that's when the shear stress actually reduces when you're at high strain rate, so things flow more easily at high strain rate. The opposite of that is shear thickening, when the viscosity increases at high strain rates. I think that's a little bit less common. And then there's actually another type of non-Newtonian fluid that you've actually already come across, called a Bingham plastic. So a Bingham plastic is one that doesn't really deform at all, so it doesn't really have a viscosity until you reach a yield stress. And at that point, it starts to flow and has some finite viscosity. And you've come across that, I said, because that's actually what solids do. So when you're using either like a normal plastic, or even many engineering things like aluminum will do this, right? So you basically strain them, or you stress them up until their yield point, and at that point they're no longer elastic solids. They actually flow like fluids for a while. And so in that case, the solid becomes a fluid, stays a fluid until you've strained it past the point that it can take that, and then it might actually fail. So at least in a certain point of view, a solid becomes a fluid after it yields. Okay, anyway, it doesn't really matter. All of the fluids we're going to come across in this class are simple liquids, and all gases are simple fluids that can be described using Newton's law.